All right, here we are back on the Energetic Principles podcast, and I have a very special guest with me today who hasn't been on the program in a while, but is a dear friend of mine. We've got Analisa Six back with us again. Thanks for joining me.
For having me. It's so exciting to be here after 2.5 years, 3 years, some
It's been
amount
a while. um, Sagittarius season 2020, I think.
of right.
Sounds like so long ago. So long ago. We we're getting we're getting into the program here today in a very weird space. Both of us are in a strange space, and we had strange connection issues to get on with our microphones and feedback and you know what? It speaks for Pisces season.
Really is. I just feel relieved that I'm not the only one feeling ungrounded in my body today.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I just so the listeners know, I'm a little out of it today. I got this crazy sore throat for the last 3 days, and I'm not, I need to knock on wood when I say these things, and it could be the Scorpio rising in me, but I never get sick. So it's just a weird, strange feeling. And then Annalisa's you said you were suffering from vertigo.
The 30th. Today's the 8th, the 9th. Today's the 9th.
Today is the 9th that
Yeah,
we're
so
recording.
vertigo spell yet today, and I feel like it kind of stopped yesterday, so I'm in the clear, but I'm still kind of dizzy, so I don't feel confident that I'm in the clear, because what happened like every day that I had vertigo over the last week was I kept thinking I was in the clear and going about my business, and then I would like have this huge spell and just same thing, kept feeling like I was getting better. And on not yesterday, the day before yesterday, whatever day that was, Tuesday, um, it was so bad that I had to ask my husband to come home from work and stay home with me because I didn't think that I could do anything the rest of the day. Like I just had to stay in bed. And that's why we went to urgent care yesterday, because I was like, this won't go away. What's happening? So I'm still kind of nervous. I'm like, okay, I haven't had a spell since that day, but
Vertigo is so strange. It comes on when you least expect it. It's very Neptunian. Let's just say that.
very
Very Pisces. Very Pisces. So we're talking about we're sharing uh our different ailments, and then we're trying to get on, and we're just having audio issues, and it was feeding back, and we changed some devices, and we got where we are here today. But it's funny, we just kind of were both like, you know what? It is what it is. And I thought that was the perfect start to Pisces season, to be honest. It is what it is, when you're rolling with things in life, like what you're handed. There's sort of this, just kind of like adapting, letting go, kind of accepting what you can do, what you can't, like
one card in the tarot.
what card?
The Hanged One.
The Hanged One.
Is Pisces. It's a very I mean, you had me on the show this other than just enjoying my presence, I hope, but the fact that a Pisces moon, I know you like to have people that embody the seasons. And so I will say that I do feel like the Hanged One is a good archetype for those of us that have Pisces as some of our dominant placements. Because like you said, like there's kind of this need to surrender, like you have to surrender with the flow of what's happening. And I feel like vertigo is a really great example of how you feel like you're hanging upside down and everything is spinning and there's just nothing you can do. Like I literally closed my eyes and was holding on to my bathroom sink and just going, please God, stop, please God. And walking to my bed and just thinking, I really actually think of Saturn when that happens to me. I think of Saturn and the earth, and I try to imagine myself earthing and grounding, and I try to imagine mundane reality, because as a Pisces dominant person, I'm naturally disassociated. And it's hard for me sometimes, once that gets triggered, to find reality again. So that's something I've had to work on, is like thinking of a square and a flat surface and all of that stuff. But I totally felt like the hanged one this whole last week, where I've just been like, oh my God, like I can't do anything.
It's wild. You literally have to just go along for the ride you didn't ask to be signed up for. The ticket you never bought, but somehow managed
Yeah.
to find its way to you. So I guess before we get started here, that we're going to talk about, obviously we kind of precursored this Pisces season 2023. Analisa, share a little bit about yourself with the listeners. Tell them who you are.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to me on here before, I was doing astrology and tarot readings professionally since 2017, I think, and moved out to Yucca Valley, Joshua Tree area, and actually started experiencing some chronic health issues. So I stopped working. I haven't worked in a while. I'll get more into that once it makes sense with some of the transits, because that's going to be anecdotal. But right now I'm just blogging. I have a blog called Lady of Leisure, where it's a take on Lady of Leisure. The definition of a lady of leisure is a woman who no longer needs to work. And while I wish my circumstances were more glamorous than what they are, I definitely am trying to lean into kind of the parts that can be fun about your health, you know, kind of taking over your life. So Lady of Leisure is just kind of a creative project for me, and also a way to kind of keep myself, you know, doing some astrology stuff. Like I started doing monthly horoscopes on YouTube for the Sober Curator, which I've been writing for since 2020. I do astrology stuff for them, and just kind of any kind of lifestyle stuff that I want to write. So I'm not doing anything professionally. I'm not offering readings in a professional capacity, but I'm definitely trying to keep my toes in the astrology pocket and the content bubble. And then I also am a dog trainer, a positive reinforcement dog trainer. So before my Lady of Leisure activated, I was working with dogs, which is also another passion of mine. So that is me.
That is you, and I love it because you know, you're a mutable rising. You got that mutable moon, and I swear, you know, mutable energy has this ability to just be in all these different pockets at one time. So we have our planet watching, dog dog training, Lady of Leisure here. Leisure. You gotta get the Leisure, our Leo
Oh,
sun.
you didn't pick up on that one.
Oh, wait, say that again.
And for listeners, I'm a Leo, if you didn't pick up on that one.
Yeah.
That's the Leisure spin. Like,
I love it.
yep.
So, all right. Well, it's good to have you back on the program. We're going to have to, I noticed with our particular timing, since we're on like different devices, if either one of us talks at the same time, it will cut the other person off. So I'm going to give you ample space, because you know what? This Mars in Gemini loves to interject. I'm just interjecting all the time. Because I want to make sure I hear what Annalisa's saying, because I always love talking to you. You bring such good insights to I mean, astrology, yes, but all things in life.
Back at you.
So, all right, well, let's get in there, because we got a lot to talk about today with Pisces season. You know, well, I prefer it, especially it being my fifth house, to like sit back and maybe just go with the flow. And I'm like, I don't know, this year, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of precursor stuff kind of taking place. So Pisces season is going to start on Saturday, February 18th. And of course it's a welcome shift. I think a lot of people find it welcoming, because gets us out of the two back-to-back Saturn seasons with Capricorn and Aquarius. So there is that mutable water, and that you know, the switching of the focus to the traditional ruler of Jupiter, who happens to be in Aries as we speak here. And so that's an interesting facet to Pisces season as well, since I think last Pisces season we had Jupiter in Pisces. So here we have this totally different emphasis taking place. And so, Annalisa, when I say Pisces, what does Pisces season mean to you? What comes up?
Yeah, so I like that you asked that. I wrote Pisces season equals in my notes and then wrote just a couple notes there. So it's the last bit of winter. So it's, we see the new year like often in the Gregorian sense as kind of being the new year. And I almost feel like in California, the weather kind of is a fake out a little bit in February. Like we kind of start to feel like the like Aquarius season a lot of times feels like a fake out. Like the clouds start to part, the weather starts to get better. We're kind of like, oh yeah, it feels like spring. And then Pisces season starts, which is that last bit of winter. And the weather kind of goes back into this doom and gloom, and everybody gets super bummed out in March, and everybody's like, wait, no, what happened? So I always think it's good to remind ourselves that Pisces season is the last, month of winter. Essentially, it's our last little bit of gestation before the spring equinox, before the bloom. So from an astrological perspective, the new year doesn't start obviously until Aries season. And so for me, Pisces season is very much about honoring that gestation period and the unknown. I mean, I think a lot of people experience a lot of seasonal depression over these like January, March months for that reason. There's so much weird shifts weather wise and energetically. And then obviously every astrologer at the beginning of this year was like, no, new year, new you yet. Like we're not there until February because of how the transits were. So yeah, I think it's definitely a time where I've learned to slow down and honor that we're not quite there yet. And this is still a really good time to sit with yourself and kind of work on the deeper parts of like that new year, new you always has to start within, right? It has to start with inner reflection and kind of this time of really not just thinking about, but feeling into, that's the Piscean part, feeling into the subconscious parts of why we do the things that we do. And I think it's a great time to kind of harness that part of your cycle rather than always thinking that everything's happening externally at all times, which obviously Jupiter in Aries and even some of the other transits that we have that come on through Pisces season, it's always a balance. It's not like, oh, it's Pisces season, so we're just going to cocoon the whole time. But I think that that's a big part of it, right? We have to get deep sometimes to understand what actions to take essentially. So I think people too that lack a lot of water in their charts tend to really despise Pisces season, because if you like to shut out the emotional realm or you don't like being sensitive, which is a term I'm learning to move away from, which we could talk about, I guess, at some point. But I'm learning that sensitive can be a derogatory term, and that we're kind of needing as a culture to maybe find better ways of describing emotional intelligence. And I think Pisces season is a really good time to get in touch with emotional intelligence.
I love that, because it is very much like a spiritualized feeling sort of energy. And why Pisces season is it's so funny, because I feel like Pisces season gets this facade every year, especially last year when we had all the Jupiter and Pisces, and we were getting ready for the Neptune conjunction, and there was just like all this Pisces idealism and this sea of like, it's like every year we kind of get in this like rose-colored glasses that, oh, Pisces season's coming, I'm loving it. And then we get to the end of it and we're like, oh man.
Yeah.
What was that? A lot of people are like, what was that? But it's like this, it's the last sign of the zodiac. It prepares us for the spring. And of course that's different if you're living in the southern hemisphere, but it's like, the spring of our of our souls, I guess. And a lot of time we do our I almost think of like Pisces as like spring cleaning before the spring.
Yeah.
But but it's like a more of an emotional place and more of a spiritual, and and feelings can't necessarily be ignored, right? Jupiter energy coming in, it's like they're going to be the purpose of it is to move us forward, right? Like it's evolution, it's soul growth, and the only way through it is through it,
Yeah.
so to speak. So that's
Out.
what I think of.
Yes.
Now, that being said, this particular Pisces season has a doozy of a week, the third week. And of course, we're going to get into that, but I'm just going to give a little precursor of it because I mean, there's a couple things, right? We have Saturn ingressing into Pisces, which is big news, huge news. On a full moon in Virgo, nonetheless, it's like it makes a grand entrance. It's like, hello, I'm here. But not too long after that, we have a major, the week of March 13th, we have some like major Neptune, Mars, Sun, Mercury action that's all tied into sort of what we might have been experiencing when Mars was going retrograde around late October, basically mid-October through mid-November, because part of the Mars retrograde cycle with Mars being in Gemini had to do with the square to Neptune. And so we're rounding the bend on Mars getting to the end of Gemini. Not this season, folks. You gotta hang in there. It's not quite there yet, but it is going to make a square to Neptune, the third square, at the same time that we have a Sun-Neptune conjunction and then the Sun Mercury cazimi basically on Neptune that week. So we're gonna get more of this flavor. Even me just bringing that combo up. Analisa, do you have any like thoughts that come to mind for that wild Neptunian week?
I'm fearful for my vertigo. I'm like, oh no, is my vertigo a precursor to a bigger vertigo week? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't fear transits always, but I think it depends on, I guess it always depends on us, right? It depends on what we're trying to initiate or do during that time. And the thing that's nice about being an astrologer is that we can look ahead and go, oh, not right now. That's not a good time. Or we can look and say, oh, that's a really great time for that. So I think that there's a lot of things I really like about Sun Mercury Kazimis. I think that they're really great for insights and intellectual pursuits or, new ideas. And I think when Neptune and Pisces energy and Gemini energy is involved, there's so much possibility. Like that's how it feels to me. There's opportunity, there's possibility, and we can get out of the idea that things have to make sense in order for us to like, here's kind of like a bigger thing that I kind of think of like, I know we're not really talking about Saturn and Pisces all the way yet, but like Saturn representing mundane, structure, reality, or practical, logical ways of getting to something. And I think the part that practical people tend to forget or not always acknowledge is that oftentimes the way we got to something was with a dream or an outlandish idea. The whole world that we know it as humanity came from a dream and an outlandish idea. And to me, that is very Pisces and more Gemini than probably a lot of the other signs, because Gemini does tend to think in a more analytical, broad way, and then Pisces tends to be very, it doesn't have to make sense, but Gemini can do the mathematical part to make it make sense, well, how do we make it make sense? And so I think that this energy for those of us, which I'm not saying is me, but can be sometimes because I have Mercury and Virgo and I do have some Capricorn placements, we can get stuck in linear perspectives like, oh, this shouldn't work because of X, or, oh, I could never achieve that because I don't have the means, or I don't come from money, or, it just, it's not practical right now. And I think when we have transits that kind of pull the rug out a little bit or explode that thinking, for people that are holding so desperately onto things that make sense, it's very threatening because it should make sense. But for those of us that like to dream and like for it to be a little chaotic or not make sense, or we want to prove that if we have a dream, we can find a way to make it happen, I think that this energy is really constructive for the visionary and the dreamer.
Yeah, it definitely does emphasize the dream. And I think like that's a big part of the whole Mars retrograde. I feel like is that our life kind of got switched around. We're asking ourselves what we're doing, like what, to get to this point. And it feels like this is like the actual turning of the corner, which tends to happen with squares, right? It does give us a crossroads sort of feeling to it. But it feels like there's this turning of the corner, especially when it comes to dreams and visions and yeah, I love the idea of the outlandish idea, the thing that how could this possibly be possible? Well, you never know unless you try. You never know unless you strategize to kind of figure that out. And like at the end of the day, you can't take it all with you. And that's a big part too, like we have to remember that mutable energy is transition energy, as is just Pisces in general. So there is like, I feel like if there's a time to sort of let go, even let go of a dream or let go of an old motivation or having too many things on your plate, and being more in touch with what your spirit or your soul needs instead of trying to juggle, all the things. That might be, there might be a coming to terms with that particular week. But also, there's the element that sometimes the world does that for us, and when people get laid off, they weren't intending that to happen, but then, but now maybe I can follow my dream, or you know what, I never liked that job anyway. So, kind of thing. And it kind of sends you into this, kind of spiritualized soul searching, or even like maybe not even so much searching, but just like an aha moment with, like what you actually need. And sometimes that does come through loss, whether you choose it or it happens to you, sort of thing. So these are all potentialities on the plate here, and of course we kind of like look into that a bit further. But what about Saturn and Pisces? Any thoughts come up for that shift?
Yeah, I took some notes, which I can't look at on my computer without being afraid it's going to conflict with our sound. But I really enjoyed, I will say, not to like, I feel like this is a faux pas in promoting another podcast on a podcast, but I did watch the astrology, Chris Brennan's podcast. What is it called? The
It's
astrology
astrology
podcast.
podcast.
I don't think I got through the whole thing. It was like the 4 hour, like 2023 thing, but they had some really fun Saturn and Pisces stuff on there that was just, I just have to say, it was so enjoyable the way that they broke all of that down. But I decided to go down my own little rabbit hole. There's a couple things I found really interesting just with researching the first year of Saturn in Pisces. So the first year that Saturn was in Pisces last time was 1994. And there was just some interesting things. They were saying that trend wise, crop tops, animal print, monochromatic styles were really in. They were saying that it was really important that your shirt matched your pants. So I'm, from a fashion perspective, very curious, because I know a lot of 90s styles are kind of they've been coming back for like 10 years, but I'm curious about kind of some of that stuff. I think it's interesting. Pamela Anderson is already coming back into the ether, because 1994 was kind of a year that she was really popular too. So that was also kind of interesting. There was a lot of people around the world that were trying to break the Guinness Book World Record, or some kind of record for the largest dessert. So there was like a few different desserts that were made that were considered to be the biggest on record for that time period. NAFTA was put into effect when Saturn was in Pisces. So that was kind of interesting. Nelson Mandela was voted as South Africa's president when Saturn was in Pisces. Kurt Cobain, who had Saturn in Pisces and was also a Pisces, took his own life when Saturn was in Pisces, which I think is a good segue into some of the things that Saturn and Pisces can kind of do for people with substance abuse issues. Speaking as someone in recovery, Saturn in Pisces tends to be a signature where those consequences of those choices, like alcoholism or drug abuse, the consequences of those tend to be a little bit more likely when Saturn is passing through a sign like Sagittarius or Pisces.
Oh, we lost her. We'll just pause for a second, come back.
That was fun. That's having my phone on here. My aunt called me. She never we always have scheduled phone dates. She never calls, so I apologize about that, but it might happen again. But yeah, Saturn in Pisces, I think, is a time for a lot of people going through recovery or who are not in recovery. Oh man.
Oh, you might have to put on do not disturb so that it doesn't go to the
Let's try that.
That's funny.
It's here with our Zoom. Okay.
It's in theme. We're in theme with all the
I've never actually done a Zoom recording on a podcast on my phone before, so I feel like an old lady. Not not knowing the phone etiquette on the recording. But yeah, so I guess maybe I should stop talking there and see what you have to say. But that's kind of like a big theme too. There's also in the media a lot of, this was another thing that was interesting actually before I hand it over. R. Kelly and Michael Jackson were very in the media in 1994. So if that's something with Saturn and Pisces, I just thought that was kind of interesting. So I guess my point in bringing that stuff up is like the themes, you know, kind of who's in pop culture back then. A lot of times when these cycles come back through, we'll see a resurgence of these people. We'll kind of see them in media again, or they'll kind of have little waves of popularity again. So like Saturn in Aquarius, Elvis had Saturn in Aquarius and his movie came out while Saturn was in Aquarius, and he also had North Node in Aquarius. So I tend to kind of think it's fun to look back on the trends, what was happening politically, who was popular during that time, because we're likely to maybe see documentaries or information about those people or those things, maybe some new candy, maybe some more like largest omelet of the world, you know, that was like one of the themes. I don't know, but then also, you know, people talking about their recovery maybe more publicly, and depression issues. There's also a lot of domestic violence cases that were public that year, and like the Tanya Harding and that whole thing happened that year too, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. OJ's case happened when Saturn was in Pisces as well. So many interesting things. I just went down a whole rabbit hole where it's kind of like, wow, I almost looked at a white Bronco too recently and was like, I don't know if I could drive one of those because of the connotation, but you know.
Oh my gosh, I see you in a white Bronco.
I would drive a white Bronco, but that's like the first thing I think about, you know. I'm like, oh, that's OJ's car. And then what the irony if I had one during Saturn and Pisces, like that would be, I didn't think about that when I was looking at it. And then once I made that connection, I was like, I was just looking at a white Bronco.
Well, as long as you're not getting chased by police down the 5, I think you're good.
I feel like I get on my back by getting one, so maybe not. I'll have to paint it.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, you brought up a couple good points there with just thinking about like Kurt Cobain, and you know, because I mean, Saturn and Pisces, there can be like this depressive element that comes in, especially if you do have Pisces placements or Virgo placements or any mutable placements, so to speak. But I mean, he was definitely a Piscean character there, but there is this quality that can come in with, you know, depression and substance abuse, and but also wanting to get a grip on that too, right? You know, because I think that's another thing with Saturn and Pisces. It seems like in the past there's all these kind of public programs that are put into place for people that have challenges in life, such as substance abuse or poverty related you know, situations, or with the, you know, just inequalities in general, or people that are considered you know, the marginalized people, for whatever reason, you know. So there is that sort of structure that starts to come in around how do we help these people, or what do we do about these situations, especially when we think about like unsheltered people, and that being a big focus, especially here in Southern California. You know, this is that is a big issue. And so all these things are going to start to come in, but of course, you know, I guess I'll save a little precursor, a little spoiler alert. I'll be talking about Saturn and Pisces with Samuel Reynolds here in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. I think that's going to be a great episode. But Pisces season gives us the first taste, right? We get the ingress, and the ingress is big because it's not going to go back into Aquarius. It's done its time there. So, you know, starting March 7th, we got Saturn and Pisces for you know, what I think finally leaves in 2025 as like the full on get it out of here, you know. But what's that?
All right, so we've got some good time with it.
You do. It's very fitting for Saturn, right?
Yes.
Let me give you some time to sit with me in this place that you wouldn't normally think I'd be in. You know, you think about the idea of like form and structure and discipline and effort, and, you know, coming into this very, you know, boundless sort of, you know, watery place. But, you know, if there's one thing I'll say, you know, water and that kind of earth element, like it has a very creative vibe to it, like a form-based creativity. So that seems very promising, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. The technology stuff that was going on when Saturn was in Pisces was really interesting too. So I'll wait, since you're doing a whole podcast on that. I won't bring any of that stuff up, but it's pretty like cool to see how much came out during this time from that, you know, perspective. That's kind of what they were talking about on the astrology podcast too, the creative aspects of Saturn and Pisces. And that's kind of that thing again, where it's like when we have this energy accessible to us, it's up to us to channel it, right? Like we could, I almost feel like when you don't channel an energy and you become kind of like a watcher of it, you either are enjoying the show or maybe you're feeling the oppression or the, you know, I think that's where the depression or the escapism part of, you know, Pisces can come in if we're not in an active state with it, like an active healing integration mode with it. But yeah, Saturn and Pisces is such an opportunity for anyone that's creative to tune into that energy and get super inspired. But I do think there's a little bit of a tortured artist element with Saturn and Pisces. I don't think it's smooth sailing as like a signature from most things that I've, I guess, absorbed about it. You know, it's not like you have this Venus or Jupiter kind of energy that's making it an easy road. It's very much like an intentional, I'm doing this kind of energy that you almost feel like a slave to the art a little bit, maybe, or like it's running you. With like Saturn kind of has that flair to me, like it's running you, you know. I watched that documentary that's making me think of Fire of Love. Did you watch that yet? About the okay, it's this documentary that is up for an Academy nomination, and it's about these two volcanologists, I think is what they're called. They basically study volcanoes, and the way they talk about their love for volcanoes is just unlike any, like, it's just such an interesting thing, you know, to be like so enamored and obsessed with one thing, like volcano, that you dedicate your entire life to that one thing. That always, I don't understand people that have the ability to do that, because I'm interested in so many things as a Piscean and Sagittarian mutable person. But I really like, I really enjoy watching people that are that dedicated. And I almost feel like even though Pisces isn't so much that way, Saturn can be very much that way. And I think it's a great time if you have this like desire or passion to really create something great, that combination, you can really dedicate yourself, you know, to it during that transit.
Yeah, because it makes me think of and this is just by Pisces South Node speaking right here. This is straight from the Pisces South Node house. Is there's this quality sometimes of giving up with Pisces that can happen. But Saturn, like I like what you're saying, like, with Saturn, like, kind of flows with you. Like it's there. Like there's no, it it's almost like you have to rise to meet the Saturn with it, and you can't kind of give up on it. And maybe with any mutable energy, it's going to go through twists and turns. It's going to be a sidewinder. It might step away for a second only to walk back how much later. It does have that quality. But it feels to me like there is this, and that's kind of the idea of the tortured artist. And I don't want to say it, tortured artists and musicians. I don't want to like peg us all this way, but there's sort of, a lot of people do have that sort of archetype within them. And it is tortured because it's persistent. Like the idea of, like, even like being involved in music. Like if I go through periods in my life where, especially I've had one rather recently, where it's like, I put it down and I don't want to touch it. It has disappointed me in many ways, but the thing is that it's persistent. It's still there. It won't go away, and if that's not Saturn, I don't know what is. But that is part of the torture, I think, is because it is so embedded and so rooted, that you have no choice but to do it or engage with it, or, even if it's hard or it's challenging or it disappoints you at times.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that's going to be a big theme for a lot of people this next couple of years.
Yeah.
You know who was born the last Saturn in Pisces was Harry Styles and Justin Bieber.
Well, let's see what
they're having Saturn return.
Yeah. All these Saturn return babies are going to be coming out. All you Saturn and Pisces folks out there, or those of you born in the late 60s. I don't know if I'm doing the mid 60s, mid late 60s. Everybody, all those, so it'll be interesting to see if we see those people out in the media more, and especially with the younger folks kind of going through those Saturn return moments, which are always big defining developmental processes. But I wouldn't be surprised to see, the second Saturn return folks coming back with a whole new endeavor or a whole new foundation or creative, just something new for them, where they're not reinvented per se, but they get maybe a second wind.
Yeah. Totally.
So, all right. Well, other than those big things, just a heads up that we still have all planets in direct motion during Pisces season. So that's a big thing. The life is moving on. We are going. We got Venus in, I think Venus goes through not three signs total, but she wraps up her Pisces transit. She goes all the way through Aries, and then she dips into Taurus before we finish Pisces season. So she's on the move. And then we also have Mars on its way to finish up the Gemini transit. But like I said before, it won't be till the end of March that it finally leaves, but just count the days. I feel like I have like this person in jail that's just been like marking off a Mars and Gemini day for the last 6-7 months. I'm like, oh, there's only 30 something days, but no. But yes, it is moving along, but it is not going to move along until we get kind of a big hurrah with all this action that we will be talking about here. So let me go ahead and share my screen for those of you who are watching the video. Where I feel like it's wild. I feel like my brain is on some like different wavelength right now with whatever this thing is that my body is fighting.
Right.
Yeah, I almost thought about postponing, but then there wasn't really a space to fit it past this point. So it like kind of felt appropriate to talk about Pisces season in this state. And then I get on and Analisa's in the same spot with her vertigo. And I'm like, let's do this.
Yeah,
go through this our weird embodiment,
yeah.
disembodiment, see where we end up. I don't even have the right date on.
I know,
Let's,
I was wondering if this was February 1st. Are you trying to get
yeah,
to the
I don't know what I'm trying to get to here. All right, here we go. Sun in Pisces. What am I doing? All right, February 18th. It'll be around mid-afternoon here in California. But like all the other past few months, we have the season starting right before a new moon takes place. So we kind of have this balsamic moment, with the moon in Aquarius, conjunct Mercury there. And Venus, who happens to be making a sextile to Pluto right before we have our new moon in Pisces. So this is kind of the setup there. And I'm just going to jump right into the new moon because that basically is kind of the kickoff point because it literally happens the next day. So we are in reflection mode when it starts. But basically the next day on February 19th, which is a Sunday, or at least here it'll be Monday. It's one of those lunations that happens super late here on the Pacific coast. That means it's happening the next day for pretty much everywhere else in the world. It's a good way to start off the Monday there, but let's dissect this new moon in Pisces. It's at 1 degree and 22 minutes. And we just had Venus who made that sextile to Pluto. We have it's interesting because the last few new moons, the Aquarius one and the Capricorn one were all configured to Jupiter. And so this one isn't necessarily configured to Jupiter, but it's ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter is still present here and getting ever closer to Chiron as well. And then we have Mercury that is trining that Mars in Gemini. And Venus is like just about to move into Aries. She moves into Aries like just immediately after the new moon. So what's your first impression? I mean, and we got Saturn. We can't discount this out of sign conjunction going on with Saturn too. So Saturn's present. Saturn is present here. So what do you think? What comes up for you when we see this Pisces new moon?
Yeah, I mean, in a simple way, without looking at too much other stuff, I feel like new moons in Pisces, especially if it's at the beginning of Pisces season, is such a great time for working through subconscious healing, like somatic healing, those types of things. And I think that because of the trine between Mercury and Gemini, or Mars and Gemini, Mercury and Mars trine, I feel like that story for me, the Mercury Mars story that kind of keeps saying things with kind of the newness of the new moon, plus the ending of a story with Venus at 29 and Pluto at 29, like sure, all those factors. I can't help but I keep kind of telling people, what were you doing when Mars stationed retrograde? Like, what was your plan when that was happening? And then what was the story during the Mercury retrograde? Because I think that the Aquarius moon that we had, where Uranus stationed direct kind of shortly after, and we also had the square to Uranus, I think was what happened. If remembering correctly, I know I wasn't the only one saying this, but that really felt like a breakthrough moment energetically. And I think that we're getting to this point here now where it's like, okay, the plan or the board has been reshuffled already. We're already not really seeing things the way that we thought we were going to back then. So now that the board's been reshuffled and you have this breakthrough and this insight, what are you going to do differently? What are the intentions that you're setting now? That's very intuitive for me in terms of how it all feels. And of course, that's my own projection too of what's happening in my life, but also just through listening to other people, I feel like that seems to be pretty on board for how people are thinking right now post Aquarius moon. And I think that there's so much of this like ready to move on energy, and we have everything direct, that I think it's such a good time to get kind of at the beginning of what we were talking about, the vision. What's the vision? what's the intention now with whatever, like what was that new information that was gathered during the retrograde cycle that you were reflecting on, and how do we create a new vision, and how do we set, not necessarily acting on the new vision, but how do we set intentions and look at the steps of the dream in order to put that vision into application. Because I think the, like once we get to the Virgo time of the full moon, we might feel more structure around it, but for this part of the season we might be feeling more like we're ready to take all of that new information and put it into a vision. It's always hard for me talking so like Piscean with it, because I'm always thinking of my linear friends where they're just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, but I'm like, you know, that liminal space where you just think about things and feel into, like, I'm a manifesting generator in human design. So to me, like, I guess the best way that I can describe the way I see this kind of energy is it's not about what you're doing every day in the mundane or on the physical level. Like, sure, that stuff matters, but like if your fantasy isn't correct, and if you're still trying to have these boundaries on what it is you're trying to cultivate, what you end up manifesting gets really messy, or it's not totally in line with what it is you want. And so I think that this is a good opportunity to get really clear on that. And that does happen in the physical, and not a lot of people believe that it works that way, but those of us that live in the imaginal know that it does. So it's a great time to like dream journal and get in touch with the imaginal realm and imagine all of the things that you want to cultivate. And that's literally all you have to do. You just have to walk through it in that liminal space. You don't necessarily have to physically do it yet.
No, I love that. And I love what you brought up about like putting all the like what the dream is or what you're trying to do, and then putting these old like forms of like rules or expectations or whatever onto it, which kind of like muddies the whole intention of what it, you know, what it could actually be. And I think that, I mean, that might be my own takeaway from that particular thing, but I think that's a big part of it when we are moving towards this fully new creation, you know, right? Jupiter is in Aries. This we're on this full new cycle around the zodiac. And so there is more so than last year with our new moon in Pisces, with, you know, Jupiter in Pisces and still having all these things to wrap up and like dream in a different way, or, you know, how we actually like the term transcend or like move on from something, so we could even get to the point to where we feel ready to start something new, you know, like there, like I kept calling it like emotional baggage that needed to be cleared out first.
Yeah.
But now it feels like that the baggage is kind of clear and we're actually at the imagineering stage. And the whole time you were talking, the thing that I kept seeing in my head were these little baby sea turtles that are
Oh,
on the sand trying to make it to the water, you know.
oh,
And it's like that's a hard, you know, they're vulnerable. They're just starting out, they're, you know, it's a big sea. They kind of know what to do when they get to it, and they're able to just kind of float along and get their bearings with it, but almost like getting there to begin with, and that long stretch of sand, that's kind of what I was thinking about with like the Saturn being kind of close but out of sign. um yeah, I just feel like maybe we might be some baby sea turtles, so to speak, that if we can stretch and like get what it takes to kind of dive into this more liminal space, and this space where there's not as much control, but at the same time, there's so much potential and possibility. If you just kind of flow with it and open to it, you know, there's no telling what can be created on the other side of it. So I think you're absolutely right with the like taking the time to vision board and dream journal and pay attention to your dreams at this time, right? You know, Pisces season can definitely give us some wild dreams. We're like, where did that come from? And it's because your subconscious is speaking. But there's a blessing to that Mercury Mars trine, and then Jupiter is not too far off from that either. So there is this nice just accessibility with strategy, and the mind being in a place where we can kind of dream. Yeah, you know, Venus she's still locked into a 29-degree Pisces dream, and the moon and the sun there, but there is still this kind of order and this detachment that's coming with this air, with the Mercury and Mars piece, that is very helpful, I think, with the strategy of the vision, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's too really common for these types of transits to feel. I love the baby sea turtle analogy, but I think that part of the vulnerable part can be when we're vulnerable, we overthink, or we could feel
Mm.
anxious, feel ungrounded. And so there's not a lot anchoring this new moon that much. So I think that's also something for people listening to kind of think about is, how do you dream and maintain your anchor? How do you allow yourself to let go and flow, but still stay anchored? And um, I always, when I'm having a vertigo spell, have to remember to find my anchor. So if you're overthinking, or you're anxious, or you're getting lost in the liminal, some of us really enjoy living there, but it can definitely get away from you. So, maybe you find your anchor first and then dream. But that's something, EFT tapping is something that, like, I was doing in somatic therapy, because it helps bring you back to earth. So that's also, I think those modalities are always good to remember during these transits too. Like, when you start getting too comfortable in the disassociated dream, that you can tap your way back to the earthly realm, and know we need that earthly realm too. Some of us reject it, some of us cling on to it, but it doesn't have to be like a either or. But for some people, this is probably really welcomed inspirational energy, and for others it could be this, like, I'm crying and overthinking and anxious, and it just
Yeah.
depends how you're harnessing it.
Yeah. And once again, we're in mutable territory. There are multiple options at play, and you might be feeling both. Like, that's the thing, is it kind of, it's there's a duality at place that always comes up with mutable energy. So it can be a little bit of both. One minute you're totally inspired and you see, you got all the hope in the world, and the next moment you're like, oh, but it's not, like, and then you see the other side, and all of a sudden the hope is gone. And there's this, and you just have to play within that realm. But I love you bringing up the just the anchor and the grounding, and why it's really important during this cycle to probably lean on the earth moons, when the moon is going through Taurus, and the full moon in Virgo, and then the moon in Capricorn. That those seem to be sort of where, not 100%, but, like, to me, that's where those anchor moments might live, and kind of at least bring you back to practicalities, and what's needed in a very pragmatic way, or how you can kind of ground and center. Because if you can't bring the vision down to earth, what good is
Doesn't
it?
happen. I love an earth moon too. As a Pisces moon, I earth moons are one of my favorite transits in the month.
Yeah. And so, speaking as an earth moon, like, I appreciate what it gives me, but sometimes I'm like, you need to stop being so dense. You need to stop being so, like, you're always down to earth, and that's the thing, is if you're someone who is totally down to earth all the time, and you're too anchored, like, this could be a transit that helps you to be like, oh, wait, look at, maybe I'll flow with this. Maybe I'll let go of some control. Maybe I don't have to control everything. And if I just flow with something, and kind of flow with the inspiration, or flow with the situation, I could float downstream, and it's a lot easier. And I might end up in a place that I would have, I didn't know that I'd prefer to be, uh, but would have never gotten there if I didn't, kind of relinquish the,
Like,
the grip.
great, great
Yeah.
advice for the earth moons out there.
So it's a new moon. It's a new moon. It's a new moon that kicks off all mutable quarters. And so what I notice is that when we have a new moon, mutable new moon, and then we have mutable quarters, life is shifting, life is transitioning. We are moving on, we are finishing up. We're saying goodbye and getting ready for hellos. Like that's just kind of that transitional point. So you can think about this whole time too, sort of being in that. Because just a caveat, we're not going to be speaking about it here today, but Aries season provides us with 2 Aries new moons, a 0-degree Aries new moon, and then a solar eclipse at 29 degrees. So think about this season as, this is that big transition. This is that big preparation. This is that big letting go, like it's all encapsulating what is getting prepared for the sprout or the bloom or the beginning or so it's got that preparatory feeling to it too.
Definitely.
So that being said, let's move on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sum up things within our quarters. So that's how we're going to take things, right? So the first quarter moon is going to be on Monday, February 27th. So in that time, we're going to have Venus, who's going to ingress into Aries on the 20th, on that Monday. We then have the defining factor of that week really seems to be that Mercury is squaring Uranus here and making that trine to Mars, which I guess we didn't really say, but that fits with our going back. So that's going to happen on the 21st and 22nd. But of course, we're going to, get activations for that a little bit later on in the week when the moon moves into Taurus on the 24th, on Friday, right? When the moon is conjunct Uranus. And then we have our first quarter moon that happens on that Monday. So we have a whole week that has Venus, basically Venus getting situated in Aries. And then we have this Mercury square Uranus, trine Mars, all while the sun also sextiles the node. So there's sort of support and development there. But I mean, Mercury, Uranus, Mars, that's a way to kick off a lunar cycle, I'd have to say.
Just stay off the internet for a few days because you're going to get real offended and feel like you need to fight with your counterpart. I always there's like, even though they're trining, and like that was something that I was kind of like, oof, like people are really going to feel like they need to get on a soapbox. And then when you add in the Uranus square, I just feel like it's even more that way. Like the activist is activated. And it's like you could even get into something with somebody that's on your same team about it. It's just like everybody wants to champion for what they have to say.
Everybody's got to say, yeah, it feels like everybody does have something to say. And maybe, with Uranus, basically, Taurus is known for being a little stubborn, maybe a little rigid there, and so we got this fixed square going on. So there's sort of this intensity of viewpoint, so to speak, and then it's added by this energized Mars here. Now, of course, there are going to kind of be breakthrough moments that come with this too, that energize us in some way to take action or get our ideas on paper, or just a restlessness. That's the thing too, is like it just seems like there's a restlessness to like just get going. Let's get going already, with that Uranian piece. But they're also, I feel like just the nature of Pisces season and it being a time of letting go, there could be like literally letting go. Like if you're going to get, like, I could imagine someone getting a notice that at work that they're being let go and the company's making cuts, kind of thing.
Right.
And then your life is, and not to say that everyone's out there is going to get fired by any means, but kind of has that surprise communication factor that can disrupt what is reality and what is fixed in that kind of Taurus space, or that finance space, or that grounded space. And then it either kind of has you back to the drawing board, or having to come up with different ideas, or it just kind of has this disruptive quality that is also comes in to activate and lead to different strategies, so to speak. But it's all in service, in my mind, this kind of Sun North Node piece also. And so I feel like there's going to be a lot of kind of maybe some plot twists, or kind of just changing scenarios that happen this week. The week of, I don't know what the week of the 20th, the week of the 20th.
And it's okay to change your mind. That's a good affirmation for this week. It's okay to hear somebody else's point of view and maybe learn something you didn't know before.
Amen to that. I mean, it's also good to listen, right? Sometimes we miss something we can learn when we're not just open to take it in, or we're defending our space, or defending our position. It's like, well, maybe if we see the other side.
Yeah.
Because it does seem, because we got to remember that the whole week is rushing to basically that first quarter moon that is going to happen and kick off the next week. Oh, where did it go? Let me see what happened. All right, fixing it up here. Yeah. All right. So on Monday, the 27th, right? Because the whole, first quarter kickoff of the lunation cycle is a very active time, and it's kicking off in Gemini, and it's also kicking off where, to kind of speak back to your point about thinking about the Mars retrograde cycle. And I mean, where Mars was retrograde when it went retrograde, but also what was going on when it went direct, around January 12th, because we have a first quarter moon that is exactly on that station direct degree. So there is sort of an activation of that area of your chart, and that area of the sky, and it's busy. Gemini is as busy as a bee. We have just a lot of energy floating around. And so I love when you said there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. And I mean, changing your mind in relation to other people and new information that comes in, sure. But just changing your mind on your own, going through your own process, or getting in touch with your feelings in a sense, and being like, what, it's okay to have a different opinion, or to have a different strategy, or to not want to do that anymore. And I'm feeling more called to this, right? Because, Gemini, the lovers, has that choice kind of component that comes in. So I think that might be, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be heady. It's going to be busy.
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
So many thoughts about just the way Mars Gemini played out in my life. So I feel like when I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking about my own plans that didn't go the way that I was trying to get them to go, which has been, obviously the case for a lot of us since 2020. But I think that, when Mars stationed direct, that was my last day at work. Not direct, I'm sorry, retrograde.
Yeah.
Last work, the end of October. So I've had to, the whole Mars retrograde cycle was me accepting a completely new reality and changing. I can't tell you how many ideas or thoughts I've had in the past that I'm changing my mind on right now. So yeah, I'd be curious, if people comment on this podcast, on the video or the recording, just letting us know if there's things that you track with this cycle where that resonates for you. Like, I'd be curious to hear what other people have to say in terms of this cycle, what changed for them, or what different ideas have come kind of out of the woodwork. Cause I think you're right. Like, as this first quarter happens, I think there is a little bit of a reflective nature to it in that way. I mean, I was writing that down in my notes for this, and I'm curious for you, like, has anything like that happened for you? Have you noticed that things that you were kind of cycling through during this time is totally different?
Oh yeah, I feel like I started out the whole retrograde like with all these, I had too many potentialities and too many interests, old interests, new interests. And there's not enough time in the day. There's not enough energy, there's not enough time in life to entertain all that Gemini thinks up, and that's kind of like a reality here. And so I feel like this first quarter has this sort of like make up your mind moment, or go choose this direction, because I feel like ever since Mars went direct and Uranus went direct, because I agree with you on the sort of like that kind of like breakthrough, and like people, like everybody I talk to too, they're kind of getting to these points in their life where maybe it's not all figured out, so to speak, but there is this sense of like knowing or release or liberation, or just feeling it like kind of like a hands in the air of like, okay, after all that, I'm pretty good. I'm feeling like finally I'm on the other side of this sort of thing. And I feel like in the last handful of weeks, as all these planets went direct, like I'm getting more and more in tune with what, ideas or concepts, or just, or even like actions, we're talking about Mars being in Gemini here, don't work for me anymore, or I don't want to do them, or you know what, I thought that I had that idea, but that idea is not mixing with this one, and I only had this much time and space. So it's like there's sort of this weeding process that's going on, and I'm much more clear on the ideas that what, they I was kind of curious about them, but no, I'm not anymore. Just I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Oh, it's no, I mean, I always think of Gemini energy as curiosity for sure. I think that's why the Piscean Gemini combo makes me feel so much of that let's fuck around and find out, kind of feeling. Pardon my cussing. I don't know if anybody, I know some people are really offended or see that as super unprofessional, and I'm so not that person, but I apologize if anybody else is. But yeah, that's the F around and find out was basically what I felt like was the Mars retrograde cycle, was like, this isn't really the time to like make a clear decision or path for yourself, but it's a great time to F around and find out. And I feel like that worked for a lot of people to kind of approach that season that way. And I feel like the people that were trying to really get clear on things were having a really hard time. Like, it's like if you were trying to carve a linear path during that cycle, it was very like, this is not the time to be doing that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard with Pisces too. It's not super linear still, but I think that we've through that cycle of reflection, like you said, I like that term weeding out. That feels very much in line to me with how it felt. We're weeding out just the parts that we're ready to kind of move on from or change. And that's been feedback I've gotten. I've had a lot of people in my life where I feel like that's pretty congruent for most of us. My life is so unknown right now that I don't necessarily feel too super clear. But one thing that I do feel clear on that's happened is I've gotten a lot of validation, like that reflection back. I just have had a validating experience. Like, I keep effing around and finding out just to get validated in things that I already was intuitively feeling or felt like I already knew. And that's helpful, because then it's like, oh, maybe I don't have to feel like I don't have to question this. I just can know it now, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. There was a lot of questioning. It's a
Yeah.
lot of questioning. And even just the trajectory that you kind of laid out right here, is sort of in line with what's coming. And I think
Yeah.
that March week that we were talking about, that kind of really gets us to that moment. So we'll put that in our pockets for later. But this does seem to be, because once again, I'm just going to hammer this point home: mutable energy, transition energy. We're transitioning here. And that's the thing about this year too, like I'm just on a broad stroke, is that we have all this Aries energy that's about to take place, but Aries isn't necessarily established either, so we're still in this, like you're saying, like I don't have it all figured out, or like my life's still a mystery, like there is this, like, embrace the great mystery, go with what your intuition knows, and let that be the plan, let that be the headspace. And certain things will figure themselves out when they need to, right? You kind of like, it's like playing those games where you have to search for the next clue, and you don't get all the clues at one time. You can't solve the puzzle because they gave you all the clues. It's like, no, I got to figure out this clue, and then I'm running and going to this room and doing that, and I'm like, and then I find the other clue, right? So there's sort of this game being played, for lack of a better term, that the universe is playing with us right now. But it's experiential, and it involves the intellect and your acumen, your clever acumen, basically, to sort of navigate your way through.
I love it.
So let's talk about the week of February 27th. So we already said we kind of get an oomph with this first quarter moon in Gemini on that Mars degree. So now a couple things are happening. This is where we're going to start to get more of that Aries action into play, because we're going to have Venus, who we got to talk about Venus and Aries here. She's going to make a conjunction with Jupiter on March 1st. And then she's going to make a conjunction with Chiron on the 3rd, which is really a preceding transit for Jupiter meeting Chiron. I mean, they're right next door to each other. They're only a degree apart at this time. But I feel like her story, she's bridging the gap. So this would be interesting for relationships and balance just in general, and independent creativity and things along those lines. But we also have Mercury at the same time making that conjunction to Saturn, who's at 29 degrees of Aquarius, right? Saturn is at its last breaths of Aquarius, and Mercury is going to conjunct Saturn on the 2nd, and then move into Pisces the same day, because Saturn's that close to leaving Aquarius. So, and then we also have the sun, who is going to make a sextile to Uranus right before the full moon that is coming. And that's going to be later on the week. So we have basically these themes happening. Is we got a Gemini first quarter trying to kicking us off. We got a lot of Venus, Jupiter, Chiron action in Aries. We got Mercury transferring the last Saturn and Aquarius message. And then we get that sort of aha, moment with the sun sextiling Uranus. So let's talk about Venus here. I mean, just Venus and Aries in general. What comes up for you with her in that placement?
Yeah. I always feel like kind of a jerk. I love Venus in Aries, so I'm not trying to be a jerk, but Venus is in detriment in Aries. It's not where she's supposed to be necessarily expressing herself. But I do think that the parts where I think there's a lot of glamorizing of acts of service, or sometimes prioritizing other people in certain aspects of Venus energy. Like we have harmony, and I don't necessarily see like self-sacrifice, but I think that some people view codependent energy in a very negative way, right? And I think that there's a lot of people with Venus in Aries that sometimes feel threatened by Venus and Libra energy. And then there's people that need more Venus and Aries in their life because they're more on the Libra dominant side. So my point in bringing all that up is, depending on where you're at, like if you're a very self-oriented person, Venus and Aries could be pulling you more that way, in a way that could be harmful to relationships, because you might feel this need to really center in on yourself. But if you're already wired that way and working on conjunction and integration of the other, sometimes that can be even harder during a Venus and Aries cycle, because the energy is pulling you more towards autonomy and independence, which is fine. But we have to kind of remember, if we're in a relationship or relationships with others, to be mindful of those actions or how those things are expressed. Whereas people that need more autonomy or need more self-focus, Venus and Aries is such a positive time, you know, because if you're already struggling with choosing yourself, or you're already struggling with acts of self-love, Venus and Aries, especially with Jupiter and Chiron in the mix, is such a great time for healing any kind of wounds that you have around your identity, autonomy, or independence, or self-assertion. And so again, it depends on who you are and how you're wired, right? Because if you're somebody that's overly assertive, overly aggressive, and overly autonomous, this is a be careful time, because it's like Chris, you know, like you have to be careful. The self-inflation or the self-preservation that can happen when we're getting motivated in a self-oriented way can get too big for our britches with a Jupiter emphasis. But again, if we're the opposite and we really need to work on integrating this energy more, it's so supported for you to work on that. And I think that we need to work on self-love, identity. I call it, I'm pretty sure this isn't my term and I heard it somewhere, but identity medicine. You know, this is a great time for identity medicine or acts of self-love, or even learning how to have autonomy within relationship in a supportive way, or working on your self-confidence in your relationships with others and the relationship that you have to yourself. So I personally love Venus and Jupiter in Aries. Like I have a Venus in Libra, so it is kind of an energy that's good for me to integrate more, especially as a Leo, because Leos tend to seek validation from outside rather than within. And Venus and Aries can be a good time to work on validation from within. But, you know, it's like you'll see those memes kind of everybody's like, I buy myself flowers. We've got the Miley Cyrus flowers song. And that energy, like, I'm totally pro it. But if you're trying to have healthy, successful relationships, you can't live in that space forever. Like, you do have to learn the value of giving and receiving in a balanced way. So that's my 2 cents.
I think that's spot on in a lot of ways, especially the self-love component, because I think that's it's a big part of the Venus and Aries story is self-love. And the challenge around that sometimes, right? That's not difficult it's difficult for a lot of people to connect with that. I mean, I've definitely had my own struggles with it. Sometimes we're there, sometimes we're not, but I feel like there is this big dose of like connecting with the relationship with the self when she meets Jupiter, and then goes on with Chiron, right? Jupiter gives us that I mean, granted, it can go overboard, and so I totally know what you're saying. Like the people that are just already wired to kind of be like, I am this, I am doing that. You could hit that Jupiter conjunction on Wednesday, and then by Friday, on Chiron, you're the person you wanted to, the person you had a date with, or the person, are like, I'm burning you. I'll see you later. Because Mars in Gemini is basically ruling this whole Aries configuration right now. So we got to think about that. And Mars is a little haywire as we just coming off of especially that first quarter moon. But anyways, there is, for those of us that really need a solid shot of that self-love and that self-assertion and that getting in touch with your own like creative fire too, you know, like that that I feel like Venus can tap into that as well. And the wounds that are around that, right? You know, what holds us back from there, from that, is what's the level of assertion? How do we move forward and past this? How do we move past it? And I think this is going to bring that up. It's going to bring it up individually within ourselves. It's going to bring it up in our relationships, because anytime Venus is involved, you know, we're relating. I mean, we're relating to people all the time, but there's this big component here. And so there can definitely be all those things that are triggered at this time, but I feel like a little bit of that Jupiter juice, that wisdom and that broader perspective is like, as it comes to Chiron, like it can blow up a wound, it can blow up, you know, what triggers us there, but it can also give us the perspective and the teaching and the wisdom and the understanding of why that's there. How do I move on? How do I grow from that? And you know, what's our biggest what's the word I'm looking for? Our biggest, like our biggest teaching grounds, relationships, you know.
Yeah.
They really are. And so you can expect a relationship probably to teach you something about yourself
Love it.
this week. So now it might be a little crunchier when you know, the moon is in Cancer here, especially in between there on Thursday, because that's when the moon is going to basically make a square to all these planets. So even though it happens on the 1st and the 3rd, Wednesday and Friday, Thursday is kind of our crunchy time. And then that Leo moon can help once Venus moves past all this, and that Leo moon on Saturday the 4th, it's like we're flowing with it. So it's like, stay with it, see what you can learn from it. I feel like the full self-love and like, you know, coming back to yourself and your own needs and harmonizing that out definitely is supported by that Leo moon there that comes at the weekend. But let's talk about this Venus, or sorry, this Mercury, because the whole time this is happening, Mercury is basically on Saturn, which will dampen a little bit of the of
Yeah.
this fire, right? You know, so yeah, why that's happening, we basically have Mercury. What do you think about Mercury? I mean, Mercury being the last one to really connect with Saturn, at least that's not the moon, in well, it's in Aquarius, but then that move to Pisces. Well, we can save the move to Pisces because actually we're going to talk about that a little bit here in this next week's segment. But what do you think about just that Mercury Saturn interacting with at the same time as that?
I mean, I haven't really thought too much about it until today, with just knowing that we were going to talk about it. But I guess the way that I feel about Aquarius energy as somebody that only has my North Node in Aquarius, and I guess someone that's a Leo that's opposite, I think that I personally think what I would advise people to do, including myself, is to look at what's changed with Saturn in Aquarius. So think back to when Saturn entered Aquarius and this entire transit that you've been under, you know, we've all been under, and think about where you were at in terms of your ideas about the world, about yourself, about what you were doing with your life, and then where they're at now. And even this would be a great journaling exercise, I think, to like really sit with the whole cycle, because it's the end of a cycle, you know, that we're not going to be in again for a really long time. And so because it's at those final degrees, I think it's a great time to reflect on that. And then I think too, thinking about the ideas, you know, in a fixed sign like Aquarius, realizing that what you may have been fixed about 2.5 years ago that you think you're fixed about now, like think of how much has changed in that time period. And then as you know, we are about to move into mutable Pisces, knowing that your ideas today, like we talked about being okay with changing your mind, like you might have a fixed perspective today, but again, like be okay with that changing. And so that's how it feels to me. Like I see
Yeah.
Aquarius as a very activist advocate for what you believe in. And so when I see Mercury in Aquarius with other transits, just in general, I feel like we do get really passionate about our perspective on things. And a lot of, you know, Saturn to me is a wisdom planet. It's not like it's based off of ignorance. I don't see Mercury and Saturn together as just like, oh, I have these beliefs that are just going to change at the drop of a hat because I'm ignorant and I don't know what I'm talking about. I think that it's more like you're open to that teacher, that learning constantly, and seeing your own perspective changing over time. And you know, Aquarius, as much as fixed as it is, also represents change and innovative thinking. And so, you know, if you were to ask me 2.5 years ago what my perspective was on working from home on the computer versus what it is today, totally changed. Like complete, I'm so much more open-minded to this whole platform than I was at the beginning of the cycle. That's just one example of my perspective changing, but I guess that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like I see this last little conjunction energy as the opportunity again to let go of our previous ideas and, you know, just kind of trust our wisdom, trust what we've learned, learn from it, hold on to it, honor it, take it with us, you know, don't just let go to the point where you're, you know, thinking that you haven't learned anything valuable that's worth holding on to, but being open to the innovative qualities and, you know, fighting for what you believe in while knowing that what we consider to be right and wrong changes like with every decade, like every version of society. So yeah, I'll be interested to see. I think the Aries influence during this last little bit, I could see a lot of people indignant on that last little bit of fixity, like holding on
Yeah.
almost, you know? And I guess I'm kind of here to like, I just want to push like the way that it feels in my body is like, don't hold on too tight because you're about to get pushed.
Pushed. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I feel that. It totally makes sense. And you know, even think about the mixture of like this self energy versus this kind of communal energy, and then both the varying wisdoms of both Jupiter and Saturn getting activated at this particular time. And especially if we have difficulties with relationships and we're navigating that and more serious minded, it's like I love that because it's true. You know, the next hours later, Mercury moves into Pisces, and that's a different story, right? You know, that story changes. That story that story changes. And so even getting in that rigid moment there, it's like, know that, yeah, the tides are turning, like literally. I mean, but Saturn's only in Aquarius for, and that's an interesting, it's only in Aquarius for a few more days. And that's the interesting thing too, is like Mercury being in Aquarius at this last moment during this kind of big lineup on the 2nd of March. It was the key that was making all the planets defer to Saturn. So once Mercury moves into Pisces, we have this bouncing off of you know, Mercury, Jupiter to Mars, back to Mercury, and Saturn's out of the final dispositor game, basically. So
Yeah.
all those months, or last couple of months where we've had, it's just Saturn, 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 Saturn.
Yeah.
A tide is turning right here, and there's almost like this relief, right? And then the sun makes that sextile to Uranus on right when the moon squares Uranus too on the weekend, and it leads us basically to this full moon. So let's look at our full moon. That's on March 7th, which is going to be a Tuesday. And so we have this full moon in Virgo here. And we have our Mercury obviously in Pisces, which we just talked about here. So that's ruling this full moon. We have the luminaries are flowing with Uranus, right? So we have another Uranian, we keep having these full moons that are aligned with Uranus. And we also obviously have Saturn here at the last minute. Like, it literally moves into Pisces, like, I think like an hour later, less than an hour later after the full moon apexes, Saturn moves into Pisces. And then of course we have this conjunction that we've been talking about of Jupiter, Chiron, and Venus. So I mean, Virgo full moon, what you thinking?
I mean, I will say the moon in Virgo is just personally and selfishly one of my favorite energies. I get so much done usually in the material. And we were talking about spring cleaning, kind of like preemptive spring cleaning. I think this is such a great energy for that, especially with Uranus. Like, this is that restless energy you were speaking to earlier that Uranus can sometimes ignite. And I think when we have the Pisces Virgo axis, like, Virgo so much wants to put things to order and wants to organize and kind of, even daily routines, health routines. And, Pisces is a little bit more of the chaotic side of it. But I think this is a really great time because we're, it's like, okay, this is the last full moon of the astrological year. Like, let's make some space for the spring. That feels very in line with me. I don't know, that's my projection, I guess. That's what I'm excited to.
Yeah, no, I totally, it's a clearing out. But in a very practical way. It's like moving things out of your house. It is donating stuff to charity. It is, deciding, what, that I am done with that habit. I'm done putting my energy into this particular thing because now I'm aligning with what I see over here, right? It's like life literally changes in a very tactile way when we have a full moon in Virgo. At least I find it to be. And it happens every year. This is like it's like our prep for Aries season is like, what pieces of your life, tangible pieces of your life do you need to move around to make space for what's coming? And so that really is what this feels like to me. And we had a whole nice lead up to get us on board with that, right? With Mercury conjunct Saturn and then the Venus, Jupiter, Chiron piece. And so here is the Uranian component coming in, being like, okay, now let's change it up. I'm awakened to this, and now I'm reorganizing this, and I am upgrading my life to make this transition. And so it feels very freeing and clearing. And yeah, just navigated also by something we want to distance ourselves from, right? Because it's ruled by that Mercury in Pisces, which is its detriment and its fall, right? So this moon isn't upholding anything. It's getting space from something. It's leaving something. It's exiling itself from something.
Me get space from all the things I need to donate in my garage.
Set the date. Set the date. This is your date.
This is those bags of clothes to the thrift store that's 5 minutes down the street.
Yeah, make that space in your life. Get it out of there. Get it out of here. This is your time, right? Because change is coming. So I personally like this full moon, and I think we can make some really good use of it to for prep and clear and rearranging. So let us carry on with the rest of this week here with the full moon. So obviously we have Saturn moving into Pisces, which that's going to take some while to get situated. We're probably going to have to wait till we get like a moon that squares it, which that will happen with our actually our Sagittarius moon coming up here. So we'll put that on ice, pun intended, for a second longer here. But we have a lot of a lot of flowing movement. We've got Venus, who is going to make a sextile to Mars, which is always good for relationships sort of flowing and jiving and getting on the same space and creative energies and just feeling more in harmony with, the anima and the animus of your inner world. There. So we have that happening. Actually all on the same day, March 11th. So this is Saturday. We have Venus sextiling Mars. We have Mercury sextiling Uranus. And then we have Jupiter conjunct Chiron. This is the actual conjunction here with a Scorpio moon. Fun, fun. But they just feel like there's a flow going, you know, there's innovation, there's open-mindedness, there's collaboration, there's sort of this kind of moving past these, like fully understanding this. Now granted, let me just say that Thursday, March 9th, it might be a little crunchy because that's when that Libra moon is going to oppose that Jupiter Chiron piece in Aries. So we will get sort of that light up of, you know, me versus you, or some of the things we worked through with Venus going over this position. But I feel like ultimately, even if something flares up, it's harmonized because we're willing to think differently, right? With the Mercury Uranus, and we're willing to find some sort of collaborative effort that is aligned with our own desires, but honors other people's too, to some degree, if that makes sense.
Definitely. We can only hope.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But there's just a nice flow to this particular week, and especially the weekend of the 10th and the 11th, or at least I think so. We'll have to come back, but I want to move on basically to, just everyone heads up, March 12th, daylight savings time. It still exists in many places in the world. So if you're like us in California, we're springing forward on Sunday, March 12th.
I keep being told this is the last one, this is the last one, and then I feel like it keeps happening and I'm confused.
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening, and we're losing an hour. We don't fall back, we spring forward. We're going into the future. So you ready for it?
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's get on to our Neptune week, because really it's the last week here of Pisces season. And we've already done some talking about it, but we'll recap a little bit before we wrap up our forecast here. But we have this last quarter moon in Sagittarius on Tuesday, March 14th. Now it's going to be at 24 degrees Sag. So just a little caveat that it'll be probably like actually about Monday. We might actually sleep through it. That moon in Sagittarius is going to square Saturn in Pisces. So we'll get our first like taste of the moon interacting with Sagittarius from Saturn and Pisces from that space. So maybe just keep a lookout on early Monday. How you're feeling. You might get some insights with that Saturn and Pisces. But we do have on Tuesday our last quarter moon in Sagittarius, which definitely feels very, right? Like it feels very dreamy. It feels very like bigger picture, expansive. If you think about it, it's like the last quarter in Sagittarius leads us into another an Aries new moon. We got double fire, you know, back to back. And so any thoughts on last quarter in Sag? Basically, okay, so let's think about this. Look at this. Look at this T square with that Sagittarius moon, that sun. Yeah, Mars, Saturn, or why do I keep bringing Saturn's like, talk about me?
I know. I feel a lot of Saturn wanting to be present. I spent so much time thinking about Saturn before this call. That probably didn't help.
It's on our minds. We can't get away from them. But this is really about that Sun, Neptune, Mercury, Mars, moon piece. So last quarter on Tuesday evening, March 14th, at least here on the Pacific coast. Yeah, this is activating. This is where this week gets very intriguing. And we're entering in, right? You know, think about the last quarter space. This is what do we need to do to move on, right? It's activating, but it's not activating something new. It's activating what needs to wrap up, at least in my opinion. And so yeah, so so what do we need to wrap up? What?
Yeah, so I personally, as a Sag ninth house dominant person, feel like whenever Sagittarius comes and prompts anything, it's usually, again, it has a similar quality to Gemini, where there's a curiosity, there's kind of this questioning feeling that happens, but it's more about values and belief systems, right? And so I think part of the storyline that we've had so far with Pisces, with some of like Pisces season, I should say, with the Venus Jupiter Chiron conjunction theme, that's kind of segues into the Virgo full moon and all these other things we've talked about. You have this opportunity to get really clear with yourself on what you need this year. You know, who are you? What do you need? What is your authentic self? Who are you away from everybody else, to yourself? What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? How are you kind of clearing space for yourself moving forward in this next astrological year? And I think that, you know, again, like last quarter moons, like you were saying, are wrapping something up, and Sagittarius is always asking you, what are your belief systems, and are you living in line with those belief systems? And again, we might have had some of those belief systems change or evolve. I'm going to share anecdotally what has been evolving or changing for me that I think is going to be my story this season, just as an example. But through the last 3 years of my career changes, my health issues, everything that I thought about myself confidently has been dismantled, like everything. And I've been kind of shoved into the opposite part of life that has made me really have to gain a lot of humility around ideas or structures that I didn't even necessarily know that I thought or felt that way about. So like becoming a housewife, like that was always, I rejected that. I rejected everything about it. And now I'm in it and I actually really like it. And I feel super messed up about liking it. And so I'm having to dismantle all this societal stuff around, I shouldn't like being a housewife, especially if I don't have human children. I consider my dogs my children, but you know, like to most people, that's a big eye roll. And so I've had to work through, well, what were my like examples of this that made me see certain things about femininity, or somebody staying home in a derogatory way? Because both my grandma and my mom were stay-at-home housewives and did it very well in a way that I should be upholding. So what happened where I'm not upholding that, right? So that was a big theme for Mars retrograde that I'm dismantling now. That I think for me around this is like entering a new phase of my belief systems. I have a totally different belief system than I did 4 years ago. The same thing's happening with my health, where I've been a very holistic, I can heal myself with food kind of person. And I'm pretty positive that no level of nutrition is going to be the antidote to what's going on with me. I started working with a nutritionist who's amazing, and nothing that she's telling me to do or sending me is new information to me, which shows me that I've had a pretty good education with nutrition. So that is also making me perceive my own belief systems around health and wellness differently, where it's like, okay, well, food might not be the answer always. You know, lifestyle might not always be the answer. There might be other things going on, which is obvious to a lot of people, I'm sure. But when you have fixed, rigid belief systems that have been ingrained to you by your family, society, and then you're challenged in life to have to look at the other side of the coin, that is what changes your perspective, your belief system, your value system. And I think that Sagittarius and Gemini are really good at doing that for us when we're going through these cycles. And I think that if you've had that happen to you through this period, you know, like you're talking about your relationship with music, and I've been there too with music, right? Like, this is not serving me right now. I need a break. But, you know, just examples like that. I think that this is an opportunity again to let go and be okay with the rug getting pulled out from you on what those previous belief systems were, and be open to exploring things that you were uncomfortable with, or that you were indignant on not letting yourself believe for whatever reasons. I don't know why I had such fear around being a stay-at-home housewife. To me, it seemed like a personal failure, but why? That's the Gemini Sag thing. Why is that? Like, what's the root of that? And I think this is an opportunity to determine that for yourself if you have any of those things going on. That's my projection, but I feel like it's on point for Sagittarius and Gemini.
Yeah, I 100%. I mean, I was just asking myself yesterday where I was like coming back to music because that's part of my dream that needs to be re-envisioned, and I realized that part of it is my belief around it, and I have pigeonholed music into the belief that it is this, or it's like, it's like mass produced in the pop aspect of it, and you have to look a certain way and like do the, like all these like just put on, beliefs around what music is to either my perception of it or the culture's perception of it. And then it's funny because I have this throat issue, right? And so in my mind, I'm like, well, let me check in with the throat chakra because I feel like something's talking to me here. And I was reading this book and going down because obviously the sound is connected with the throat chakra. And it mentioned this book, The Healing Energies of Music. And I know on the back burner of my mind that music is very healing. Music connects you to your emotions. Music connects you to, the limbic brain and this part of us that doesn't necessarily have words. And there's that space there. But was so clouded by particular beliefs around what music is based on my own experience, and then having maybe disappointments around that, and then seeing things in the outside world and like, etc. And I realized in that moment, I'm like, if I'm ever to engage with this again, especially in the capacity that I feel like I want to, I have to change my belief of what music is and what it can give, what its gifts are. And to deepen it, actually, because I was looking at it from a very superficial lens of like, the fact is I see this, the fact is I see that, but much deeper, this is like the language of our soul, like there's so much like depth that comes into music, but my own, pigeonholed belief and viewpoint just based on personal experience, and then my experience clouding what I see outside of me. So, I mean, I totally feel you with what you're saying. It's the same thing. It's not the same thing, but it's the same thing,
Yeah, for sure. It's like, what belief systems are not serving you if you want to continue to have a positive relationship with something. I relate a lot to the music one. That's something I've battled with a lot. And it's hard, like, it's that mundane part versus the deeper liminal space part where that's where like your soul is with it. And I think in fragmented Western culture, it's so hard to stay in a unified space with everything. And I hope that Saturn in Pisces helps us, marry that more, because I think that is the gift of Saturn in Pisces. And I think that the mutable cross helps us see that a lot of times too, helps us get more in that truth part of it versus the stories. I mean, Gemini and Sagittarius love stories too, so those stories also live there. We can paint a story because there was a belief system that we had that did serve us for some time, and so we feel like, this is my problem, is my stories I feel like are still serving me a lot of times when they're not. And that reality check is really hard for me sometimes to sit with, where I'm like, that story is not serving you anymore, and it hasn't been for a long time. So why is it, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
scientifically, but
Yeah, no,
like,
I get it. I get it.
yeah,
100%. I feel you. And I have a feeling whoever's listening out there might be like, oh yeah, I feel it too. Um, So this could be a big turning point around that. The week of basically March 14th, when we have that Sagittarius last quarter, and it can can get a little crunchy at first, right? Because we're in a T square with Mercury, Sun, Neptune, Mars, and the Moon. Like that's a weird party. It's a
Yeah.
weird party. And we might just be a little like, just to be a very um I don't know what the word I'm looking for is at this point, but we just might not have energy. That's the thing too. It's like we might be a lot up here in the head, and it's more because whenever Neptune comes into town, we're going to be a little foggy. Our energies are going to be a little diffused. And so it's not about pushing yourself, so to speak. It's about reflection and connection and, taking time out for yourself to kind of go through these motions. Otherwise, it's going to feel like you're pushing uphill, or you make mistakes, just because it's not necessarily what the energy is built for at this time. But the nice thing about this, though, is like we have that T square on Tuesday, but when the moon moves into Capricorn, we take pressure off the Mars, even though, I mean, the Sun Mars action is going on. We got the Sun Mars square happening, but there is this support. Remember, we were talking about leaning into the Earth moons,
The anchor.
the anchor. Yeah, so it's like we kind of get our anchor more on Wednesday and Thursday when the moon is in Capricorn, which leads us to the Mercury Sun cazimi that is. So okay, that's the thing. There's too much going on this week. There is too much. I am overwhelmed by this week, and I'm not even living it yet. But
I
these are not the
glazed
only. What's that?
glazed over when I started reading about it. I was just like, yeah,
This is the. I'm gonna go ahead and cuss in this moment too. This is universe fuckery right here.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the most lovingest way, because this is a week that is like something changes, because it's not only those things taking place. We have Venus doing her thing too, right? She leaves, she gets to the end of Aries. I'm like, I have so many notes that they're all blurring in front of me now. I'm like, what is she doing? So basically we have Venus is going to square Pluto, and then ingress into Taurus and sextile Saturn. Our first planet, actually, that's not the moon, to connect with Saturn. And that's going to be on the 16th and 17th, which is Thursday and Friday. So this, I mean, and then all basically Mercury then sextiles Pluto and then ingresses into Aries on the 18th on Saturday. And then Venus meets the North Node as the Sun makes a sextile to Pluto right before the season ends. So it talk about like a week that Pisces season like goes out with a diffused bang. I guess I think about Neptune action. There's just a lot of depth. There's a lot of soul. There's a lot of truth, but also mystery and doubt and vision. I mean, there's like, you couldn't put together more of a planetary soup, and a square soup, to some extent. So it's all leading us to something that is very much attuned with what the soul needs and what to move on with, where to have like aha moments that are very personalized in nature to just the spiritual journey itself. And then how do we make changes around that, and how do our relationships change and our sense of inner balance after that, right? I love that Venus meets the North Node kind of at the end of all this, because she's leading us somewhere that is very promising for our forward development. But if you can take time out this week, the week of it's not the 4th, the week of the 13th, because it's strange.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a good creative energy. I am thinking about hypothetically what I'm supposed to be doing in March, and it's making me excited because I'm playing my first show in 3 years in April, and so March is a month where I'm going to have to really intentionally start practicing for the first time since 2019. And I'm sure you've noticed on my Instagram, I've had long nails for like over a year.
Yeah.
And I actually just cut them down so that I could start playing music again. And it was a little, I mean, I'm excited about it, but I still was like, oh, my nails, you know. Yeah, so I mean, I'm kind of feeling supported in that sense. And hopefully other people do too, having more like an extension of the creativity energy. But yeah, I mean, it's also very disassociated time. I feel like it would be really easy to kind of lean into things that, you know, like creature comforts, not
Yeah.
necessarily promoting growth, things that promote pleasure. But you could do both. You can have pleasurable growth. I've been learning how to lean into more pleasure. I really enjoy a lot of the content coming out about healing should be pleasurable too. Like there can be such an emphasis on going into the shadow parts or the traumatic parts. And that's also like in terms of studying my nervous system, like stuff, because I think that's predominantly what's going on with me is nervous system stuff. They say that one of the downfalls to a lot of the healing modalities where you're constantly talking about your childhood or trauma is that you're flaring your nervous system up all the time when you do
Yeah.
that. And so that's not necessarily good for people that have nervous system disorders. It's really good for people to focus on acts of pleasure, you know, as a healing modality and getting your body out of fight or flight mode. And Venus in Taurus is very pleasurable. And with the North Node, there could be like intentional pleasure seeking, in not an escapist way. It doesn't necessarily have to have a negative connotation to it, although it can if you're not doing it in an intentional way during this time. So again, it's always that little balance dance that's hard to find. Like, am I procrastinating by doing this or am I healing by doing this? Nobody can really tell you except for yourself. But
Yourself. Yeah. No, I get that 100%. I think that is sage wisdom, Miss Sagittarius rising. Because it's true. I get it. Like it's yeah. Sometimes healing and gentleness and time out and connecting with things that you just love to do and that put you in the flow is more healing than like trying to work on something, like, you know, like let's get to the bottom of this. Like no, sometimes we don't need to get to the bottom, you know,
yeah,
all the time. But sometimes the bottom is too much. So but yeah, that being said, I think this Pisces season goes out with a washing machine. It's a little bit we're a little bit in the spin cycle, you know. We're trying to dry out, we're trying to get clean, whatever that looks like in our life. I mean, I feel like some people could come to that moment with themselves too, when you're talking about abuse, you know, substances and turning a corner on those types of things too. Yeah, so there is this, yeah, we're in this bit of this washing machine, and it's almost like it's like the spin cycle, like it's that's the final cycle, because this Mars was this we're reaching at this point, we've reached the end of the Mars station degree. It's leaving the shadow, right? It's leaving the shadow of the square of Neptune. And so we just, you know, just one more cycle, one more rinse cycle. And then we're on to Aries season. We go in the dryer.
I'm ready.
I'm ready to get in that dryer. I'm ready to be fluffed out. I'm ready.
Ready.
I'm ready for some fabric softener.
And ready left for sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, Annalisa, I think we did well despite our interesting ailments today. So we need one word. What do you think? If you had one word to describe Pisces season, what would it be?
Creatively. Oh my God, I can't even speak. Creatively juicy.
That's 2 words, but I'll give it to you because it's a mutable season.
We say juicy. I think it's
Oh, it's
juicy.
juicy. Juicy. Just saying that word, it has so many connotations. Juicy.
It feels that way to me right now. We'll see if I feel the same way after.
It does feel juicy. It does feel juicy. I think uh what's the word that comes to me? It that's a weird. I got a more of an image than a word. Oh, I got the word plop, and I just saw something like plop plopping out.
Plop.
I don't even know. Take it for what it is. But I imagine, actually, you know what I imagined? It was a plop of like a water droplet like hitting the ground, but it kind
Okay.
of morphed itself into like a bird when a bird like poops out of the cloaca. I
Yeah.
honestly, this is where my mind is.
I like
So release. Maybe I was thinking release.
yeah, and like a cleanse maybe. Maybe you're doing a cleanse.
Like letting it out, plopping it out the back end. I mean, that's kind of Pisces.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good.
Oh my gosh. All right. We've done it. We've done some things here today. So where can people find you? Well, tell them where Lady Leosure lives.
Yeah. My name is Analisa Six. So if you search that on YouTube, you'll find my horoscopes. You can find me on the sobercurator.com, which is where I do horoscopes. And I also include the horoscopes on ladyofleosure.com. If you're in recovery, I highly recommend the Sober Curator. They do tons of great work for people in recovery and focus on living a life in recovery, not just getting sober. So the whole point of the platform is to kind of tell you what cities are great to be in if you're sober, traveling, how to travel sober, podcasts, books to listen to, resources. And there's just so many fun articles. There's people doing wellness stuff. There's this guy that has reviewed over 100 NA beers. And he just has like his articles are the most popular, which is very fascinating. There's so much fun stuff on there. So I've been grateful to be a part of it and definitely recommend it for Saturn and Pisces season. If you are thinking about becoming sober, it's a great resource. And then, yeah, my Instagram account is Lady of Leosure. It sounds the way that I'm saying it, Leo, sure. So I don't know if that's hard for anybody to find, but yeah, that's me. I'm so grateful that you had me back on here. It was really fun to do this with you again.
Oh, you're welcome back anytime. And so if you need to find Annalisa, I will have her information over at energeticprinciples.com, where there'll be a blog post for this particular episode. And I'll also leave a link to the Sober Curator, because I think that is a valuable resource that can definitely be swimming around, pun intended, when we get into Pisces season, and Saturn moving into Pisces could be just the resource some people need, or some people can recommend, spread the good word. You can also, at my website, you can book a consultation. I do personal consultations. And of course, you can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out at the beginning of every month, the Heavenly Wind. So all that can be done at energeticprinciples.com. All right. So if you liked what you heard here today, please leave us a review wherever you listen to the podcast, or if you're on YouTube, share a comment, let us know where you're at with Pisces season, or what you think that wild Neptune week's going to bring, and all the other things we are curious about, because we will read and write back. So if you want to engage, share, and also share with friends, spread the good word, because sharing is caring. So, all right. Well, it was a pleasure having you on as always, Annalisa. I'll see you on the flip side, because I always do.
Yes.
I always do. And so, all right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning into us talking about Pisces season 2023. We wish you all the best as you swim through this sea. And as always, may the stars be with you.